Watch this.
The government shutting down in D.C. will certainly be felt here in Idaho. From lights off in federal offices to the gates closed at national monuments to veterans having to wait longer for care. Our congressional delegation tells us what you might notice first. It's the first significant look at government bloat in half a century. And Idaho lawmakers have formed a task force to trim it down. Oh, sure, the Honey Commission could go away. But veteran services? From mountain trails to open rangeland, Idaho's public lands are central to our identity. Tonight, we're going to explain the growing push to shift control closer to home. Thousands of Americans had the day off today, just not really one they requested. The federal government shut down overnight as Congress failed to pass a budget to keep that from happening. Vital services, for the most part, they're going to continue. And while the shutdown wasn't a surprise, many might be shocked to know agencies like Veteran Services, national parks, even environmental monitoring, those are now closed. Joe Paris spoke with Idaho's junior Republican congressman and a Democratic counterpart from Oregon to find out how long this shutdown could last, what it will take to reopen it, and why we're here in the first place.
Closed for business on Capitol Hill, but some lawmakers do remain in D.C.
We are shut down, and that will impact Idahoans.
Idaho Republican Congressman Russ Fulcher outlined shutdown impacts for the people of the Gem State.
We will see that in the form of agency services. The Veteran Services is going to be impacted by that. Any of the Forest Service, interior stuff, all of that, EPA, will all be impacted by that. Social Security and Medicare should be fine. That's mandatory spending, and I don't believe there's going to be an impact on that.
So how did we get here? Congressman Fulcher explains this goes back to the 4th of July when President Donald Trump signed the One Big Beautiful Bill.
The Senate side, the Democrats decided, you know what, we're going to use this as an opportunity to try to relitigate the Big Beautiful Bill, really, and that's what's going on. They're trying to reinstitute priorities that they had in the Big Beautiful Bill using this continuing resolution as a process.
Oregon Senator Democrat Jeff Merkley outlined that point this afternoon, taking issue with health care policy changes in the OB3.
It does enormous damage to American families, ripping health care away from some 15 million Americans by slashing Medicaid and gutting the tax credits that help families afford insurance.
Republicans see that as a tough negotiating point, relitigating a major win for the party and President Trump. The GOP majority is calling on Democrats to sign a basic funding agreement so negotiations can continue in a different light.
All we're trying to do is just keep things going till the appropriations are done. There's nothing weird. There's no earmarks, any of that kind of thing in the continuing resolution. This is the same resolution that both parties supported here just a few months ago, same one. And so let's just move on and get things going again.
So what do Democrats want?
So Democrats are making two reasonable requests: save health care for working families and implement spending bills as written, as required by the Constitution.
Pressure from Democrats has a reaction. Pushback from GOP leaders all the way up to the White House. Possible layoffs of federal employees instead of furloughs, meaning workers would not get back pay for days missed in the shutdown.
I think that issue is one of the strategies for the negotiation, to be honest. I think the administration is using that as a strategy, and they may act on it. They're trying to figure out ways to put pressure on the minority in order to get things going again, to get them to continue. Whether that actually happens or not, I don't know. If it does, I believe it will be very strategic and not likely to be a big sweeping move.
On a deeper level, the congressman explains there is more in play happening behind the scenes.
There is not a good reason, but there is a cause. And I'll share the inside baseball. It has to do with the New York Senate seat. I mean, that's just the reality of this. Leader Schumer is in trouble, and he needs to be able to exhibit to his colleagues on the far left side that he's willing to place a fight. And so this is his attempt to do this. And does that make sense in Idaho? No. Does that make sense for the nation? No. But that's the inside baseball. That's the behind the scenes on this. This is ultimately, I believe, about a New York Senate seat fight that's coming up.
And Congress failed to pass a new spending bill today through 2 votes in the United States Senate. And with Congress observing the Jewish holiday tomorrow, it appears the government shutdown will go on for at least 1 more day. To reiterate, Social Security payments and Medicare coverage continue. They are classified as mandatory spending. Brian, it is, of course, always important to point out this goes both ways. When the Republicans are in the majority, they are finding themselves in this situation. You can flip the script back to 2018. It was a very similar situation as well.
20 shutdowns since 1976. 12 of them have been under Republican presidents. 8 of them came under Ronald Reagan. I was questioning about Russ Fulcher really quickly about the strategy of firing versus furloughing. I mean, you can't fire federal employees without cause.
Yes, and we do know that this will likely get challenged in a court of law. There's been commentary, well, you can't do this. This administration has really tested the legal limits of certain practices, including this.
Yes, they have. All right, thank you very much, Joe.
I liken it to like a tree, right? Over time, a tree just keeps growing, and sometimes you need to trim back the branches. And so that's what we're looking at here.
That is Representative Jeff Ehlers from Meridian, the co-chair of Idaho's DOGE task force, talking about the purpose of the Gem State's Department of Government Efficiency, a task force tasked with studying and eliminating inefficiencies within Idaho's departments and divisions. Something that hasn't been done in depth since 1970, when Idahoans voted to revise the state constitution to cap the number of agencies within the executive branch at 20. Well, there are currently more than 220 divisions under those 20. Monday was their 3rd meeting, in which they talked about things like the budget holdback, state employees working from home, and the history and funding of Medicaid expansion. Then at the very end of the nearly 3-hour meeting, co-chairs Ehlers brought up a list of agencies, divisions, commissions, whichever, that his task force will be focused on over the next few years with regard to elimination, reduction, or consolidation. He came up with this list, he says, because they were either a small staff, or they've been growing too big, or they've outgrown their mission, or there could be redundancy. About 75 of the 220 or so in Idaho, Representative Ehlers came up with 4 categories. Those that could likely see legislation this next session, what he called low-hanging fruit, like merging the Bingo Raffle Advisory Board with the Idaho Lottery Commission, or eliminating the Idaho Honey Commission. They were a group of ideas proposed by the governor's office that could use a little more work, like combining the Division of Liquor with the Division of Lottery, or the Commission on Aging with the Commission for the Blind and Visually Impaired, and the Developmental Disabilities Council. There were a dozen ideas from his legislative colleagues, and finally those he said needed further review. 46 of those, including the Capital Commission, the Idaho Horse Board, the Racing Commission, or the Office of Species Conservation. But also on that list for further review was the Division of Veterans Services and the Veterans Affairs Commission, something that might pique the interest of Idaho's 125,000 or so veterans. Any sort of reduction or elimination of services for veterans, well, that would be a big deal in Idaho. But Representative Ehlers tells us that's where a lot of assumptions are being made.
So nowhere on that list for further review does it say something like eliminate. It's for us to look at and examine. One of the outcomes of the review may be they're functioning just fine. They're being efficient. So, nobody's saying on there we're just going to completely eliminate veteran services. In fact, one of the reasons those ones specifically are on there is potentially are they overlapping, and would the veterans be better served by having both of those under one body instead of divided? That would make, in my mind, a more efficient government and more efficient way to conduct business for the citizens. What if we get in there and maybe there's an excessive amount of administration? I don't know. I haven't looked at it yet, so that's to be determined. What if instead of spending that much money on administration, it was spent in the care and service of veterans? I think veterans might be happy to see that.
So we decided to ask a veteran who also happens to be state council president of the Vietnam Veterans of America. And while veterans would be all for efficiency, as it currently stands, they tell us Idaho's veteran services, the agencies, they already lack the staff to be efficient.
No, they're behind.
How so?
Well, we have just in the Joining Forces group that was organized by Idaho Division of Veteran Services. They have 9 regions in the state of Idaho, and they have 3 people operating those 9 regions because they don't have enough people on staff.
Paul Sherman tells us there are 600 nonprofits dedicated to helping Idaho veterans, a large contingency of what is already needed to fill in the gaps left behind at the state and federal level. So they're not already doing what they should be doing. Representative Ehlers reminded us today that this list of 46 in his further review category, Well, that could be years away from seeing any advancement. And even if they were to move forward, any of the 75 on this list would have to go through the legislative process, the full process. That would be a recommendation from the task force, a lawmaker to draft a bill, a committee hearing with public input, then it has to pass both chambers, and then a signature from the governor. Idaho's DOGE task force will meet one more time before the next legislative session, so we should see what recommendations, if any, come out of that.
Our identity as Idahoans is just deeply intertwined with our access to public lands.
But that access has been recently under threat. Some congressmen recently pitched getting rid of millions of acres of federal land to help pay down the national debt. Remember that? It was quickly shot down. Well, all this week on the 208, we're exploring Idaho's open spaces. And we've shown you how the feds came to own so much of the West and why state endowment land isn't actually public land, but it actually brings money into the state of Idaho. And today, Morgan Romero breaks down the debate some of you probably have had with your family and friends about who should manage these lands that are in Idaho, the state or the feds.
Yeah, we're doing this series of stories because this conversation has just been really top of mind for a lot of Idahoans, a lot of people in the West. You know, from mountain biking trails to hunting grounds, Idaho's public lands truly are sacred for many who call this state home. But a growing debate over who should control these lands has some of you asking, could the state do a better job than the federal government? And what would that mean for public access? We headed to Idaho's Great Outdoors to explore what's at stake.
What was a California quail?
Being outside, listening to nature,
And I believe I heard a meadowlark.
feeds Kevin Merrill's soul.
Just listen. Just listen. Oh, it's delightful. And just look. My wife has a serious neurological disease. She has Parkinson's, and I'm one of her caregivers. And if I can get out, focusing deliciously, intently, and completely on something natural, I go back home a better caregiver.
I've mountain biked all over, climbed all over Idaho. You know, it's been my life, my friends.
Scott moved to Boise in his 20s, drawn by the access to public lands.
Being clueless about it, coming from the East, I didn't realize, how amazing it is.
What do public lands mean to you?
Public lands means there's a place I can go without having to pay a premium. Public lands means there is value in the earth and its resources.
But you can get out there and be more remote, and it's amazing.
To me, it's a very American idea.
But across the West, that American ideal is sparking a very American debate about who should decide the future of millions of acres of public land. Washington, D.C., or state capitals. During the budget reconciliation process earlier this year,
And the impact will be to 1/3% of the federal land in the state.
some Western congressmen tried selling or transferring millions of acres of public land to states or private interests.
Nevada population centers are all encumbered by federal land that can't meet their housing and development needs without disposal of federal land.
The proposals didn't make it into the One Big Beautiful Bill. Most of Idaho's congressmen
That's just crazy.
and their constituents thought they were a step too far.
Ryan Zinke, the former Secretary of Interior and now Congressman from Montana, and I worked very hard on making sure that we got the wholesale of public lands out of that bill.
But it couldn't happen with the kind of pushback that the people had, and that was a good thing.
They want to fish and hunt, and they want to water ski, and they want to camp, and they want to go out and enjoy this incredible blessing that we have. And they are not in any way ready to give that up.
Land swaps and sales between the feds and states do happen when it makes sense, and have since statehood. But Idahoans on both sides of the aisle share the same worry. Using budget reconciliation for a sweeping sell-off would create a bad precedent, and it would cut the public out of the process.
Exchanges have always been a way to make management more efficient.
But this idea of doing it through Congress,
Or just selling it to the highest bidder. Everybody, rightfully so, is worried about what's going to happen to their access. Access to public lands in Idaho is sacred.
making money off public land isn't the federal government's main goal. It tries to balance multiple uses: recreation, logging, grazing, energy and mineral leases, often with public input. But Idaho leaders say Washington could do a better job by preventing more fires, boosting revenue, and cutting the red tape.
Under the National Environmental Policy Act, local people are supposed to have input, and nobody disagrees with that. But there have been a series of lawsuits over the years to where it's just been handcuffs on getting anything done.
So we have to go through the federal government for a lot of approvals to do anything with the federal land.
Representative Russ Fulcher believes the state would do a better job managing federal lands within our borders.
I definitely believe we need to keep the public lands in public hands. I just believe that management responsibility needs to be shifted to the state, needs to be shifted to the local stakeholders, because the current model we're struggling with, and the funding for the Ag Department and the Forest Service and Interior, it's going down, it's not going up.
Idaho's Attorney General agrees. Along with Governor Little, he's one of 5 elected officials on the State Land Board, which oversees the Department of Lands. In a statement to KTVB, Raul Labrador said if Idaho owned the land, the revenue could be reinvested in our own state. Labrador believes, quote, the federal government's overreach undermines our state sovereignty and shortchanges Idaho communities.
There are a lot of unanswered questions as to what that process would look like, the restrictions, the cost, the number of employees that we would need to hire at the Department of Lands to manage.
If Idaho took over federal lands, lawmakers would decide what agency would manage it and how.
At this point, I just don't think we could do it.
Idaho Department of Lands Director Dustin Miller says they couldn't afford to manage all the federal land in the state. They spent $60 million on fire suppression alone last summer, while the Forest Service spent at least 5 times that amount in Idaho.
We've got our lands to manage, 2.5 million acres. That keeps us pretty busy, and we want to continue working in partnership with our federal partners to improve the health and resiliency of federal lands here in Idaho.
While Idahoans can explore most endowment trust lands today, there's no guarantee tomorrow. The state constitution demands one thing of IDL: maximum profit for institutions like schools and prisons.
They are working lands. They belong to the endowment beneficiaries, but they do not belong to the general public.
So conservationists and outdoorsmen worry hand federal lands to the state, and it could end up in private hands, while public voices get shut out of the process.
About 42% of all the lands that the state has ever owned are gone from us. They're in private hands. And when you put something into private hands, you're really permanently closing off public access. And you're just changing the way that all Idahoans interact in these landscapes and the things that really define our lifestyle.
Their lifestyle and their identity.
I go back home with more capacity to love and be compassionate and endlessly patient. And I love being out in nature.
But I would hate to see a wholesale a big chopping block to a lot of the great resources that are available to the public. It's meant a lot to me, and I'm sure there's a lot of people who feel the same way.
And as I mentioned, IDL only manages state endowment land for maximum financial return, but Republican State Senator Ben Adams plans to introduce a bill at the beginning of next session to change that. He wants the legislature to put a constitutional amendment on Idahoans' ballots, setting up a new trust, which is separate from endowment lands. So if federal land comes into the state's hands in the future, it could be put into that trust and never sold or transferred.
In this new trust, that mechanism is not there, that requirement is not there. So there's no incentive to sell. And I think it changes the discussion. Instead of it being, well, we have all this land, we should sell it off, the sell-off needs to be off the table. The discussion needs to shift to, well, who's going to manage it, how's it going to be managed, and who's it going to benefit?
Tomorrow on the 208, we look back on a major wildfire that had devastating impact on the Sawtooths. Federal crews mobilized massive resources to save the iconic Redfish Lake Lodge, but many critiqued their efforts. This debate highlights a key tension. While federal management comes with layers of red tape, as I touched on, that slow fire mitigation, state ownership could mean selling off lands to cover costs Idaho taxpayers really aren't prepared to shoulder, Brian.
Lot to unpack here, Morgan.
Yeah.
The things that stood out to me when we were just talking about it, watching the story, was the state land being sold off. That's a big deal. And as the representative there from Idaho says, you know, if you build this trust, then you can prevent that happening. Sounds like a great idea.
In theory.
Secondly, in theory, yes. Secondly, with the funding, as Representative Fulcher, Congressman Fulcher said, for the Department of Ag, and Forestry Service going down, whose job is it to fund those things?
Congress.
Congress.
Yes.
So that would be on him to turn that around if that were the case.
Right, and a lot of conservationists argue that people can make that point, and then it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. They can point to it and say, hey, look, the funding's going down. These national recreation areas aren't staffed. Oh, we should scale back, and they're not doing a good job. So that's kind of a concern, but I am hopeful that things are improving in that regard.
Okay, I might have to rewatch this one again.
Yes, all right, Brian.
Thank you very much.
You bet.
much sunshine out there for the opening to October today, but still pretty seasonable. We're sitting at 73 degrees in Boise right now. Still some pockets of very light rain moving in from southwest to northeast, so expect to be dodging a couple of raindrops here and there as you're out and about across the Snake River Plain and the Central Mountains tonight. Looking ahead to the next 12 hours, we should see mostly dry conditions into the early morning hours of tomorrow. Still mostly overcast, though, and by midday tomorrow, the rain returns, really ramping up for the Boise area late in the evening tomorrow. Keep the umbrella and the rain gear handy. You'll need it all the way into Friday morning. We'll wake up to mid-50s in Boise tomorrow, upper 40s out in Ontario, low 50s early on in the Magic Valley. We will see 70s across the Snake River Plain, 50s and 60s tomorrow in the mountains. With that rain coming in late in the evening, it will linger into the day Friday. Then we dry up and stay cool over the weekend.
To point out what President Trump previously said about government shutdowns. She says, just a reminder, our Idaho delegation, then candidate Trump said any shutdown is the fault of the president for not leading negotiations. He said in 2011 and 2013 that, yeah, the problems start at the top. They should be solved at the top, and the president should get the blame. I wish they wouldn't lie to our face. If they shift the federal lands to Idaho, maybe not today or tomorrow, but eventually they proclaim we can't afford the upkeep and sell it off, says Paul. And according to others, we can't just timber our way to prosperity. We'll see you tomorrow.
Continue with us and watch free now on the KTVV Plus app everywhere you stream.